Red Star Radio. Voice of the Revolution.
Back to Iran. Um, the U.S. has hated the Iranian regime since 1979. That much is very clear. And Iran, for the past few years or 10 years or however long, has been trying to develop nuclear energy, as every country has a right to do. I mean, nuclear energy is relatively clean. It's not the best kind. I'd rather have renewable energy, but nuclear energy is a good source of energy, and it's relatively not as bad as coal, at least. So every country has the right to develop nuclear energy. So not that I like nuclear energy, not that I like the idea of Iran having nuclear weapons either, but Iran has the right to develop nuclear energy. But not according to the U.S., it would seem. Well, I'm sure they're going to let them keep their nuclear facilities, but the fact that it seems it's up to the U.S. government what kind of stuff Iran is allowed to do is pretty troubling precedent to set. So the idea that the whole concern behind this whole sanctions thing is twofold. One, that Iran is developing nuclear weapons, and two, that Iran intends to use the nuclear weapons to physically annihilate Israel. And on both counts, I would have to say, the way how I see it, it seems like a total conspiracy theory to me. I haven't seen any conclusive, real, convincing evidence that, number one, Iran is building nuclear weapons, and number two, that Iran has a design to physically annihilate Israel. Yeah. So starting with number one, the issue of whether they're building nuclear weapons. Well, I believe it was the Ayatollah himself that said that they're incompatible with Islamic law, that they're therefore people who are, I think he used a slur like against mentally disabled people to describe those who want to have nuclear weapons, and they kind of made a good point saying that the having nukes didn't stop the Soviet Union from collapsing, so what good are they? And well, I mean, anyone can say, so what? That's just what he's saying. It's a big secret. But then you can't then turn around and then quote the Ayatollah or any other Iranian leader when they go on their rhetoric about Israel and say that then is proof that they have a secret plan to invade Israel, right? You can't say that they're keeping the nuclear weapons secret, but that the rhetoric that they have against Israel proves that they're going to invade Israel. Well, do you believe them or not? People like to use like a tone argument a lot, like or not a tone argument, but they say, well, the Iranian regime are, conservative religious zealots, therefore they're just crazy and they could do anything at any time. Well, they also happen to be the rulers of a pretty big country with millions of people. They're not absolutely just nuts. They're not going to do something that's that ill-advised. Especially when you consider their motivations that they would have for doing so, even if they did, which is that they don't like Israel because it usurps Palestinian land. Whether or not that's the real reason, or they're just pandering to the Muslim world. Even if you think about it that way, it still doesn't make any sense because, what are they going to do? They nuke Tel Aviv. What do you think the effect would be on the West Bank, even on East Jerusalem? That's one of the most important places for Palestinians. You think that they believe that they can just nuke Tel Aviv and East Jerusalem will be fine? That their holy mosque that they have there will just be fine if they nuke Tel Aviv? That there won't be any nuclear fallout or anything? That's what I find pretty bewildering, that people are going along with this conspiracy theory. The other point I want to bring up is that the so-called proof that Iran does want to physically annihilate Israel was, I believe it all derived from like one quote that the Ayatollah Khamenei said, where he said that the Israeli regime must be evaporated from the page of time or something like that, and that it was mistranslated to be wiped off of the map, and that other experts have then looked at that and said, well, that idiom does not exist in the Farsi language, the Persian language, so he couldn't have possibly said that. And sure enough, I mean, to be fair, the mistranslation, I believe, was on his personal website, but just because someone misspeaks once doesn't mean that's what they mean. If you look at all the rhetoric in context, what they're actually saying is that the Israeli regime will not exist forever. It will collapse. It should collapse. We want it to collapse. But that does not mean that they want people to be killed. They're talking about a regime, just like when they're talking about how the Soviet Union collapsed. That doesn't mean that everyone in Russia died. That means that the regime collapsed.
Right.
And that's basically all they hang it on. They hang all these assumptions on a thread, and then what happens is I shouldn't say the mainstream media, the Western corporate media repeats these things, these ideas, and these interpretations again and again and again and again. And we'll see more of this when we talk about Syria, that it's truth by attrition, that they just keep repeating it over and over and over again until people believe it. And that's
right.
That's mostly where I think this idea that Iran is about to nuke everyone comes from. The fact that Iran is at least partially cooperating with the International Atomic Agency, whereas Israel doesn't even admit the fact that they have any nuclear weapons at all. They're not a signatory to anything. And if you look at the history of the two countries, which one is more belligerent, Iran or Israel? I mean, how many countries has Iran invaded in the past few decades? So that's what's happened. That's what brought us up to around the past few years. So the U.S., based on this ridiculous conspiracy theory, decides to level sanctions against Iran, and Western countries went along with it. And under the Obama administration right now, it looks like they're finally lifting it. I don't know all the details. I'm not going to go into all that, but it looks like they're finally lifting the sanctions, and they're going to be at least somewhat normalized. I remember our own conservative Canadian government even I think they shut down the embassy and all kinds of stuff. The Republicans, though, of course, are completely categorically against any negotiations with Iran. They won't stop until I don't even know what would convince them to stop sanctions against Iran, but they seem to be, I think it was Noam Chomsky that said that I don't like Obama, but he at least appears to be on this planet. The Republican candidates are just off in outer space. That was the last election. It applies to this election cycle too, when the Republican candidates say things like, I mean, one of them literally said that if we don't stop Iran tomorrow, we don't stop them soon, they're going to wipe out half of the planet, like just destroy half of the world. Like,
right.
That's not even possible even with nukes.
Yeah, like just
Sure.
completely out there. So the thing that's interesting is that it seems that Obama's aim actually was to stop Iran from developing nuclear weapons in case they actually wanted to, or in case they at any point decide that they want to. Whereas it's pretty clear to me that the aim of the Republicans isn't really about nuclear weapons at all. It's just about Iran's complete sovereignty. They want to total lapse of the Iranian regime. That's the only way to look at it.